Million-Word Reading Project. Collection 1. Book 4. Black Beauty. Produced by Million-Word Reading Project Workshop. Chapter 1. My Early Home. The first place that I can well remember was a large pleasant meadow with a pond of clear water in it. There were trees around the pond, and at the deep end of it, there grew water plants. Over the fence on one side we looked into a field, and on the other we looked over a gate at our master's house. At the top of the meadow were some tall trees, and at the bottom a little river. When I was young I lived on my mother's milk, as I could not eat grass. In the daytime I ran by her side, and at night I lay down close by her. As soon as I was old enough to eat grass, my mother used to go out to work in the daytime and come back in the evening. There were 6 young horses in the meadow besides me. They were older than I was. Some were nearly as large as grown-up horses. I used to run with them and had great fun. We used to run all together round and round the field as hard as we could go. Sometimes they would bite and kick. One day, my mother said, "Please pay attention to what I am going to say to you. The young horses who live here are very good, but they have not learned manners. They will draw carts when they grow up. You are quite different. Your father has a good name, and your grandfather twice won the most important race at Newmarket. Your grandmother was very gentle, and I think you have never seen me kick or bite. I hope you will grow up gentle. Do your work well, and never bite or kick even in play." I have never forgotten my mother's advice. I knew she was a wise old horse, and our master loved her very much. Her name was Duchess, but he often called her Pet. He called me Darky because of my color. Our master was a good, kind man. We were all fond of him, and my mother loved him very much. There was a boy named Dick who worked for my master. Sometimes he came into our field to pick blackberries from the fence. When he had eaten all he wanted, he would throw stones and sticks at us young horses to make us run around. Sometimes a stone would hit and hurt us. One day he was doing this again and did not know that the master was in the next field, watching what was going on. He jumped over the fence, caught Dick by the arm, and hit him on the ear. Dick let out a cry of pain. "Bad boy," he said, "this is not the first time, but it shall be the last. There, take your money and go home. I shall not want you on my farm again." So we never saw Dick any more. Old Daniel, the man who looked after the horses, was just as gentle as our master. Chapter 2. The Hunt. Before I was 2 years old, something happened that I have never forgotten. It was early in the spring. I and the other young horses were feeding at the lower part of the field when we heard the cry of dogs in the distance. The oldest of us raised his head and listened. "There are the hunting dogs," he said, and immediately ran off. The rest of us followed him to the upper part of the field. There we could look over the fence and see several fields beyond. My mother and an old horse of our master's were also standing near. "They have found a hare," said my mother, "and if they come this way we shall see the hunt." Then we saw a hare rushed by and ran toward the woods. The dogs came rushing across the field, followed by the hunters. 6 or 8 men jumped their horses over the fence, close after the dogs. Soon, the dogs were upon the hare, and that was the end of her. One of the hunters held up the hare by the leg, and all the gentlemen seemed well pleased. As for me, I was so astonished that at first I did not see what was going on by the river, but when I did look, I saw a sad sight. 2 fine horses were down. One was struggling in the water, and the other was lying on the grass. One of the riders was getting out of the water. The other lay quite still. Many of the riders went to the young man and carried him to our master's house. I heard afterward that it was young George Gordon, the squire's only son. His neck was broken. Later, a man came to look at the black horse that lay on the grass. He felt him all over and shook his head. One of his legs was broken. Then someone ran to our master's house and came back with a gun. Then we heard a loud noise and the black horse moved no more. My mother seemed much troubled. She said she had known that horse for years. His name was Rob Roy. She never would go to that part of the field again. Not many days later, young Gordon was buried. A fine horse and a fine young man both killed all for one little hare, said my mother sadly. Chapter 3. My training. I was now beginning to grow handsome. My coat had grown fine and soft, and was bright black. I had one white foot and a pretty white star on my forehead. I was thought very handsome. My master would not sell me till I was 4 years old. He said young horses ought not to work till they were quite grown up. When I was 4 years old, Squire Gordon came to look at me. He seemed to like me, and said, "When he has been well trained he will do very well." My master said he would train me himself. He would not like me to be frightened or hurt, and the next day he began. Not everyone knows what training is, so I will describe it. It means to teach a horse to wear a saddle and bridle, and to carry on his back a man, woman or child, to go just the way they wish, and to go quietly. Besides this he has to learn to wear a collar, and to stand still while it is put on, then to have a cart or a carriage fixed behind, and he must go fast or slow, just as his driver wishes. He must never speak to other horses, bite or kick, or have any will of his own, even though he may be very tired or hungry. So you see this training is a great thing. Now my master got the bit into my mouth, and the bridle fixed. It was a terrible thing. Those who have never had a bit in their mouths cannot think how bad it feels. It is a great piece of cold hard steel as thick as a man's finger. It is pushed into one's mouth, between one's teeth, and over one's tongue, with the ends coming out at the corner of your mouth. And it is held fast there by straps over your head, under your throat, round your nose, and under your chin. You can never get rid of it then. It is very bad. I knew my mother always wore one when she went out, and all horses did, when they were grown up. And so, I got to wear my bit and bridle. Next came the saddle. My master put it on my back very gently, while old Daniel held my head. He then fixed the straps under my body, talking to me all the time. Then, one morning, my master got on my back and rode me round the meadow on the soft grass. It certainly did feel strange, but I must say I felt rather proud to carry my master, and as he continued to ride me a little every day I soon became used to it. The next unpleasant thing was putting on the iron shoes. When they were put on, my feet felt very heavy, but in time I got used to it. And now there were more new things to wear. First, a heavy collar just on my neck, and a bridle with blinkers, so that I could not see on either side, but only straight in front of me. In time I got used to everything, and could do my work as well as my mother. I must not forget to mention one part of my training. It was very useful to me. My master sent me for a fortnight to a neighboring farmer's. One of his meadows was by the railway. Here were some sheep and cows, and I was put among them. I shall never forget the first train that ran by. I was feeding quietly near the fence which separated the meadow from the railway, when I heard a strange sound. Before I knew where it came, a long black train flew by, and was gone almost before I could draw my breath. I was so frightened that I turned and ran to the further side of the meadow as fast as I could go. During the day many other trains went by. I thought it very frightful, but the cows went on eating very quietly and hardly raised their heads as the trains ran past. For the first few days I could not feed in peace, but very soon I got used to the passing of a train. Chapter 4. Birtwick Park. Early in May, there came a man from Squire Gordon's. My master said to me, "Goodbye, darky. Be a good horse, and always do your best." I put my nose into his hand. He patted me kindly, and I left my first home. As I lived some years with Squire Gordon, I may as well tell something about the place. Squire Gordon's park was outside the village of Birtwick. We went in through a large iron gate. Then we went along on a smooth road between some trees to the house and the gardens. Beyond this were the stables. My stable was very big, with 4 good stalls and a large window. It was very pleasant. The first stall was a large square one. The others were not nearly so large. It was called a loose box because the horse in it was not tied up and could do as he liked. It is a great thing to have a loose box. The groom put me into this fine box. He gave me some very nice oats, patted me, spoke kindly, and then went away. In the stall next to mine, there was a little fat gray pony. I put my head up and said, "How do you do? What is your name?" He turned round, held up his head, and said, "My name is Merrylegs. I am very handsome. I carry the young ladies on my back. They love me very much, and so does James. Are you going to live next door to me in the box?" I said, "Yes." "Well, then," he said, "I hope you are good-tempered. I do not like anyone next door who bites." Just then a horse's head looked over from the stall beyond. Her ears were laid back, and her eye looked rather ill-tempered. She looked across to me and said, "So it is you who have turned me out of my box. It is a very strange thing for a young horse like you to come and turn a lady out of her own home." "I beg your pardon," I said. "I have turned no one out. The man who brought me put me here, and I had nothing to do with it. I don't want to have words with anyone. I only wish to live at peace." "Well," she said, "we shall see. Of course, I do not want to have words with a young thing like you." I said no more. In the afternoon, when she went out, Merrylegs told me all about it. "Ginger has a bad habit of biting," said Merrylegs. "That is why they call her Ginger. When she was in the loose box she used to bite people. One day she bit James in the arm and made it bleed. So Miss Flora and Miss Jessie, who are very fond of me, were afraid to come into the stable. They used to bring me nice things to eat, an apple or a carrot, or a piece of bread. But after Ginger stood in that box they dared not come, and I missed them very much. I hope they will now come again, if you do not bite." I told him I never bit anything but grass and corn. "It is just a bad habit," said Merrylegs. "She says no one was ever kind to her, and why should she not bite? She must have been treated badly before she came here. John does all he can to please her, and James does all he can, and our master never uses a whip if a horse acts right, so I think she might be good-tempered here. I am 12 years old. I know a great deal, and I can tell you there is not a better place for a horse round the country than this. John is the best groom I have ever seen. He has been here 14 years. And James is such a kind boy. So it is all Ginger's own fault that she did not stay in that box." Chapter 5. A Good Start. The name of the coachman was John Manley. He had a wife and one little child, and they lived in the coachman's cottage, very near the stables. The next morning he took me into the yard and gave me a good cleaning. After breakfast he came and fitted me with a bridle. Then he brought a saddle. He rode me first slowly, then fast. As we came back through the park we met the Squire and Mrs. Gordon. They stopped, and John jumped off. "Well, John, how does he go?" "Wonderful, sir," answered John. "He is as fast as a deer, and the lightest touch of the rein will guide him." They were shooting rabbits near the highwood, and a gun went off close by. He pulled up a little and looked. I just held the rein steady and did not hurry him. He wasn't frightened at all. "That's well," said the Squire. "I will try him myself tomorrow." The next day I was brought up for my master. I remembered my mother's advice and my good old master's, and I tried to do exactly what he wanted me to do. I found he was a very good rider. When he came home, the lady was at the door. "Well, my dear," she said, "how do you like him?" "He is exactly what John said," he replied. "He is the most pleasant horse I have ever had." "What shall we call him?" "He is really quite a beauty," she said, "and he has such a sweet, good-tempered face." "How about calling him Black Beauty?" "Black Beauty, why, yes. I think that is a very good name." When John went into the stable, he told James about my new name. They both laughed, and James said, "If it did not remind one of the past, I should have named him Rob Roy, for I never saw two horses more alike." "That's not surprising," said John. Didn't you know that Farmer Gray's old Duchess was the mother of them both? I had never heard that before. So poor Rob Roy, who was killed at that hunt, was my brother. I did not wonder that my mother was so troubled. John seemed very proud of me. He was gentle and kind, and he seemed to know just how a horse feels. When he brushed my head, he went carefully over my eyes, as if they were his own. James Howard, the stable boy, was just as gentle and pleasant. Merrylegs and I soon became great friends. He was such a cheerful, brave, good-tempered little fellow that he was a favorite with everyone, and especially with Miss Jessie and Flora. They used to ride him about and have fine games with him and their little dog. Our master had 2 other horses that stood in another stable. One was Justice, used for riding or for the luggage cart. The other was an old brown horse named Sir Oliver. Chapter 6. Freedom. I liked my new place. All who had to do with me were good, and I had a nice stable and the best of food. But I was still not satisfied, because I wanted freedom. For 3 years and a half of my life, I had had all the freedom I could wish for. But now, week after week, and month after month, I must stand up in a stable night and day except when I am wanted. And then I must be just as steady and quiet as any old horse who has worked 20 years. I ought to say that sometimes we had our freedom for a few hours. This used to be on fine Sundays in the summer time. The carriage never went out on Sundays because the church was not far off. It was wonderful to go out into the meadow or the old orchard. The grass was so cool and soft to our feet and the air so sweet. It was so pleasant to have the freedom to do as we liked, to run, to lie down, and roll over on our backs, or to eat the sweet grass. Then it was a very good time for talking, as we stood together under the shade of the large tree. One day when Ginger and I were standing alone in the shade, we had a great deal of talk. She wanted to know all about my bringing up and training, and I told her. "Well," said she, "if I had had your bringing up, I might have had as good a temper as you, but now I don't believe I ever shall." "Why not?" I said. "Because it has been all so different with me," she replied. "I never had anyone, horse or man, that was kind to me. I was taken from my mother as soon as I stopped drinking milk. Then I was put with a lot of other young horses. None of them cared for me, and I cared for none of them. There was no kind master like yours to look after me, talk to me, and bring me nice things to eat. A path ran through our field, and very often the boys passing along would throw stones to make us run. I was never hit, but one fine young horse was badly cut in the face. Of course it made us wilder, and we thought that boys were our enemies. We had very good fun in the free meadows, running up and down and running after each other round and round the field, then standing still under the shade of the trees. But training was a bad time for me. Several men came and caught me. One man caught me by the nose and held it so tight I could hardly draw my breath. Then another took my under jaw in his hard hand and forced my mouth open, and so by force they got on the bridle and the bar into my mouth. Then one dragged me along by the bridle, another whipping behind. This was the first experience I had of men's kindness. It was all force. They did not give me a chance to know what they wanted. I was very wild, no doubt, and gave them plenty of trouble, but then it was terrible to be shut up in a stall day after day instead of having my freedom. You know yourself it's bad enough when you have a kind master. But there was nothing of that sort for me. The old master, Mr. Ryder, knew how to deal with horses. But he had given up all the hard part of the business to his son, and to another experienced man. His son was a strong tall man. They called him Samson. He had a hard voice, a hard eye, and a hard hand. If I did not do exactly what he wanted, he would get angry and make me run round in the training field till he had tired me out. One day, she went on, he had worked me hard in every way he could, and when I lay down I was tired, sad, and angry. The next morning he came for me early and ran me round again for a long time. I had hardly had an hour's rest when he came again for me with a saddle and bridle and a new kind of bit. I could never quite tell how it happened. He had just got on me on the training ground when something I did made him angry. He pulled the rein hard. The new bit was very painful, and I jumped up suddenly. This made him even more angry, and he began to whip me. At last, after a terrible struggle, I threw him off. I heard him fall heavily on the ground, and without looking behind me, I ran off to the other end of the field. There I turned round and saw him slowly rising from the ground and going into the stable. I stood under a tree and watched, but no one came to catch me. The time went on, and the sun was very hot. The flies flew round me and settled on my bleeding sides. I felt hungry, for I had not eaten since the early morning, but there was little grass in that meadow. There was not a drop of water to drink. At last, just as the sun went down, I saw the old master come out with some oats. He was a very fine old gentleman with quite white hair. He came quietly along, speaking cheerfully and gently to me. "Come along, girl, come along, girl, come along, come along." I stood still and let him come up. He held the oats to me, and I began to eat without fear. His voice took all my fear away. Seeing the blood on my side, he seemed very angry. Poor girl. It was a bad business, a bad business. Then he quietly took the rein and led me to the stable. He led me into my box, took off the saddle and bridle with his own hands, and tied me up. Then he called for a pail of warm water, took off his coat, and bathed me gently. The bathing was very comfortable. After that, he often came to see me. Later, a man called Job went on training me. He was steady and gentle, and I soon learned what he wanted. Chapter 7. Ginger's story continued. The next time that Ginger and I were together, she told me about her first place. After my training, she said, I was sold to a fashionable gentleman in London with another horse. Here, we were reined too tight. The coachman and his master thought we looked nicer this way. We were often driven about in the park and other fashionable places. It was terrible. I had to hold my head up high for hours, not able to move it at all. My neck ached. Besides, I had 2 bits instead of 1. It hurt my tongue and my jaw. Didn't your master care about you? I said. No, said she, he only cared about how we looked. I think he knew very little about horses. His coachman told him I had a bad temper. He said I should soon get used to it. I was willing to work, and ready to work hard too, but why should they make me suffer like that? I grew more and more worried and angry, and I began to bite and kick when anyone came to harness me. After this, I was sold to a gentleman in the country. He was a good master, and I was getting on very well, but his groom was as hard-tempered and hard-handed as Samson. If I did not move quickly, he would hit me with his fork. I began to hate him. One day when he had hit me too hard, I bit him. Of course, he was angry, and he began to hit me about the head with a whip. After that, he never dared to come into my stall again. I was quite quiet with my master, but of course he listened to what the man said, and so I was sold again. A dealer heard of me and said he thought he knew one place where I should do well. I came here not long before you did, but I had then made up my mind that men were my natural enemies, and that I must defend myself. Of course it is very different here, but who knows how long it will last? I wish I could think about things as you do, but I can't, after all I have gone through. Well, I said, I think it would be a real shame if you were to bite or kick John or James. I don't mean to, she said, while they are good to me. I did bite James once, but John said, try her with kindness, and instead of punishing me, James came to me with some oats and stroked me. I have never bitten him since, and I won't either. I was sorry for Ginger. But I found that as the weeks went on she grew much more gentle and cheerful. One day James said, I believe Ginger is getting fond of me. Yes, said John, she'll be as good as Black Beauty soon. Kindness is all she wants, poor thing. Master noticed the change too. One day when he got out of the carriage and came to speak to us, he stroked her beautiful neck. Well, my pretty one, well, how do things go with you now? You are much happier than when you came to us. She put her nose up to him in a friendly way, while he rubbed it gently. Chapter 8. Merrylegs. Mr. Blomefield, the vicar, had a large family of boys and girls. Sometimes they used to come and play with Miss Jessie and Flora. One of the girls was as old as Miss Jessie, two of the boys were older, and there were several little ones. When they came there was plenty of work for Merrylegs. They enjoyed getting on him and riding him all about the orchard. One afternoon he had been out with them a long time, and when James brought him in and put on his bridle he said, "Behave yourself, or we shall get into trouble." "What have you been doing, Merrylegs?" I asked. "Oh," said he, "I have only been giving those young people a lesson. They did not know when they had had enough, or when I had had enough, so I just threw them off backward. That was the only thing they could understand." "What?" said I, "you threw the children off? Did you throw Miss Jessie or Miss Flora?" "Of course not," he replied. "I would never do such a thing. Why, I am as careful of our young ladies as the master could be. I am the best friend and the best riding teacher those children have. It is not them, it is the boys," said he. "The other children had ridden me about for nearly 2 hours. Then the boys thought it was their turn. They rode me by turns, and I carried them about, up and down the fields and all about the orchard, for a good hour. They had each cut a great stick for a whip and hit me with it a little too hard, but I did not get angry. But at last I thought we had had enough, so I stopped 2 or 3 times. Boys, you see, think a horse is like a steam engine and can go on as long and as fast as they please. They never think that a horse can get tired or have any feelings. So as the one who was whipping me could not understand, I just rose up on my hind legs and let him slip off behind, that was all. He got on me again, and I did the same. Then the other boy got up, and as soon as he began to use his stick, I laid him on the grass. After several times, they were able to understand, that was all. They are not bad boys. They don't wish to be cruel. I like them very well, but you see I had to give them a lesson. When they brought me to James and told him, I think he was very angry to see such big sticks. If I had been you, said Ginger, I would have given those boys a good kick, and that would have given them a lesson. I am sure you would, said Merrylegs. But I can't make our master angry, or make James ashamed of me. Besides, those children are under my charge when they are riding. Why, only the other day I heard our master say to Mrs. Blomefield, my dear madam, you need not be anxious about the children. My old Merrylegs will take as much care of them as you or I could. I tell you I would not sell that pony for any money. He is so good-tempered. Do you think I will forget all the kind treatment I have had here for 5 years? No, no. You never had a good place where they were kind to you. And so you don't know, and I'm sorry for you, but I can tell you good places make good horses. I would never make our people angry. I love them, I do, said Merrylegs. Besides, he went on, if I started kicking people, where should I be? Why, I would be sold off. I might have to work until I die at some seaside place, where no one cared for me, except to find out how fast I could go. No, I hope I shall never come to that. Chapter 9. A Talk in the Orchard. Ginger and I were not carriage horses. We had more of the racing blood in us. We were about 5 feet high. We were therefore just as good for riding as we were for driving. Our greatest pleasure was riding out together. The master would ride on Ginger, the mistress on me, and the young ladies on Sir Oliver and Merrylegs. It was so cheerful to be running all together. I had the best of it, for I always carried the mistress. Her weight was little, her voice was sweet, and her hand was so light on the rein that I was guided almost without feeling it. I had often wondered how it was that Sir Oliver had such a very short tail. It really was only 6 or 7 inches long. On one of our holidays in the orchard, I asked him, "Did you have an accident?" "Accident," he said with a fierce look. "It was no accident. It was a cruel, cold-blooded act. When I was young, I was taken to a place where these cruel things were done. I was tied up, so that I could not move, and then they came and cut off my long and beautiful tail, through the flesh and through the bone, and took it away. How terrible! I cried. Terrible, ah. It was not only the pain, though that was terrible and lasted a long time. But it was this: how could I ever brush the flies off my sides and my hind legs anymore? You who have tails just brush the flies off without thinking about it. You don't know how terrible it is to have them settle upon you, and sting, and have nothing at all to drive them off with. I tell you it is a lifelong wrong, and a lifelong loss, but thank heaven, they don't do it now. What did they do it for then? Said Ginger. For fashion, said the old horse with a stamp of his foot, for fashion. Every young horse in my time had his tail cut off, just as if the good God that made us did not know what we wanted and what looked best. I suppose they made us hold our heads up with those bits for fashion too, said Ginger. Of course it is, said he. I think fashion is one of the worst things in the world. Some people cut off the tails of their dogs to make them look brave, or cut their pretty little ears into points to make them look sharp. Why don't they cut their own children's ears into points to make them look sharp? Why don't they cut the end off their noses to make them look brave? What Sir Oliver said was all so new to me, and so terrible, that I found a bitter feeling toward men rise up in my mind. Of course Ginger was very much excited. She declared that men were both cruel and stupid. It is true, said Merrylegs sadly. I've seen them do that with the dogs over and over again where I lived first, but we won't talk about it here. You know that Master and John and James are always good to us. What good little Merrylegs said was quite true, and that cooled us all down, especially Sir Oliver, who was dearly fond of his master. After a while, Merrylegs said, let us run to the other end of the orchard. I believe the wind has blown down some apples, and we might eat them. So we stopped our conversation and ran to find the very sweet apples which lay on the grass. Chapter 10. Plain speaking. The longer I lived at Birtwick, the more proud and happy I felt at having such a place. Our master and mistress were respected and loved by all who knew them. They were good and kind to everybody and everything, not only men and women, but also animals. When they saw people doing cruel things to animals, they would try to stop them. I remember my master was riding me toward home one morning when we saw a powerful man driving toward us in a small carriage. It was pulled by a beautiful little pony. Just as he came to the park gates, the pony turned toward them. Without word or warning, the man pulled the creature's head round with such a force that it nearly fell over. Then, he began to beat it angrily. The pony tried to move forward, but the strong heavy hand held the pretty creature back with great force. And he continued to whip it. It was a terrible sight to me. But master gave me the word, and we were up with him in a second. Sawyer, he cried in a firm voice, is that pony made of flesh and blood? Flesh and blood and temper, he said. He's too fond of his own will, and that won't suit me. He was a builder who had often been to the park on business. And do you think, said master, that treatment like this will make him fond of your will? He shouldn't have made that turn. His road was straight on, said the man roughly. You have often driven that pony up to my place, said master. It only shows the creature is clever. How did he know that you were not going there again? I have never seen a horse beaten so cruelly or so angrily. What will people think of you, Mr. Sawyer? When you hurt that horse, you also hurt your own good name. Do you want people to think of you as a cruel, bad-tempered man? Master rode me home slowly, and I could tell by his voice how sad he was at what he had seen. Chapter 11. A stormy day. One day late in the autumn, my master had to make a long journey on business. I was put into the carriage, and John went with his master. There had been a great deal of rain, and now the wind was very strong, but we went along merrily. When we came to the low wooden bridge, the river was rising fast. Many of the meadows were under water, and in one low part of the road the water was halfway up to my knees. The master drove gently, so it was no matter. The master's business in the town took him a long time, and we did not start for home till rather late in the afternoon. The wind was then much stronger, and I heard the master say to John that he had never been out in such a storm. As we went through a wood, the great branches were shaking violently, and the rushing sound was terrible. "I wish we were well out of this wood," said my master. "Yes, sir," said John. "It would be rather dangerous if one of these branches came down upon us." But he had hardly finished speaking when there was a great noise of wood breaking. A big tree came falling down, and it fell right across the road just before us. I will never say I was not frightened, for I was. I stopped still, and I believe I trembled. Of course I did not turn round or run away. John jumped out quickly and came to my side. "What's to be done now?" said my master. "Well, sir, we can't drive over that tree, nor yet get round it. We have to go back, and that will be 6 miles, before we get round to the wooden bridge again. It will make us late, but the horse is not tired." So we went back, but by the time we got to the bridge it was very nearly dark. We could just see that the water was over the middle of it. We did not stop. But the moment my feet touched the first part of the bridge I felt sure there was something wrong. I dare not go forward, and I stopped suddenly. "Go on, Beauty," said my master, and he gave me a touch with the whip, but I dare not move. He hit me hard. I jumped, but I dare not go forward. "There's something wrong, sir," said John. He jumped out of the carriage, came to my head, and looked all about. He tried to lead me forward. "Come on, Beauty, what's the matter?" Of course I could not tell him, but I knew very well that the bridge was not safe. Just then a man ran out of the house on the other side. "Stop! Stop!" he cried. "What's the matter?" shouted my master. "The bridge is broken in the middle, and part of it is carried away. If you come on you'll be into the river." "Thank God," said my master. "You Beauty," said John. He took the bridle and gently turned me round to the road on the right. The sun had set some time. The wind seemed to have died down. It grew darker and darker. I ran quietly along, and the wheels hardly made a sound on the soft road. For a good while, neither master nor John spoke, and then master began in a serious voice. "If Beauty had gone on as I wanted, the bridge would have fallen under us, and we would have fallen into the river. Then we should all have been drowned," he said. "God has given men reason, so that they can find out things for themselves, but animals know things without thinking. Because of that, they have often saved the lives of men." John had many stories to tell of dogs and horses, and the wonderful things they had done. He thought people did not value their animals enough. At last we came to the park gates, and found the gardener looking out for us. He said that mistress had been worried ever since dark. She was afraid some accident might have happened, and she had sent James off on justice toward the wooden bridge to find us. As we came up, the mistress ran out, saying, "Are you really safe, my dear? Oh, I have been so anxious. Have you had no accident?" "No, my dear, but if your Black Beauty had not been wiser than we were, we should all have been carried down the river at the wooden bridge." I heard no more as they went into the house, and John took me to the stable. Oh, what a good supper he gave me that night, and such a thick bed of straw. And I was glad of it, for I was tired. Chapter 12. The Lesson. One day John and I were returning gently on a long straight road when we saw a boy trying to make a pony jump over a gate. The pony would not jump, and the boy beat him with the whip. But the pony only turned off on one side. He whipped him again, but the pony turned off on the other side. Then the boy got off and gave him a hard whipping. Again, he got up and tried to make him jump over the gate, kicking him all the time, but still the pony refused. When we were nearly at the spot, the pony put down his head, threw up his hind legs, and sent the boy over into a broad hedge. Then he ran off home with the rein hanging from his head. John laughed out quite loud. "Served him right," he said. "Oh, oh, oh," cried the boy as he struggled up. "I say, come and help me out." "I think you are quite all right," said John, "and maybe this will teach you not to force a pony to jump over a gate that is too high for him." With that, John rode off. Soon we came to Farmer Bushby's house. The farmer was hurrying out into the road, and his wife was standing at the gate, looking very frightened. "Have you seen my boy?" said Mr. Bushby as we came up. "He went out an hour ago on my black pony, and the creature has just come back without a rider." "I should think, sir," said John, "he had better be without a rider." "What do you mean?" said the farmer. "Well, sir, I saw your son whipping and kicking that good little pony because he would not jump over a gate that was too high for him. The pony behaved well, sir, but at last he just threw up his hind legs and threw the young gentleman into the hedge. He isn't seriously hurt, sir. I love horses, and it makes me angry to see them badly treated." During this time the mother began to cry. "Oh, my poor Bill, I must go and meet him. He must be hurt." "You had better go into the house, wife," said the farmer. "Bill wants a lesson about this, and I must see that he gets it. This is not the first time, nor the second, that he has ill-treated that pony, and I shall stop it." "Thank you, sir." So we went on. When we reached home, John told James about it. James laughed and said, "Serve him right. I knew that boy at school. He used to bully the little boys. It is not surprising that he should be cruel to the pony. Now, he will learn a lesson." Chapter 13. James Howard. Early one morning in December, John had just led me into my box after my daily exercise, and James was coming in with some oats when the master came into the stable. He looked rather serious and held an open letter in his hand. "Good morning, John," said the master. "Tell me, does James work hard and do what you tell him to do?" "Yes, sir, always." "Does he stop working when your back is turned?" "Never, sir." "That's well, but I must ask another question. When he goes out with the horses, does he stop to talk to his friends or go into houses where he has no business, leaving the horses outside?" "No, sir, certainly not. And if anybody has been saying that about James, I don't believe it. I can trust his word and I can trust his work. He is gentle and clever with the horses." The master smiled as John finished his speech. Then he looked kindly across at James, who all this time had stood still at the door, and said, "James, set down the oats and come here. I am very glad to find that John's opinion of your character agrees so exactly with my own. I have a letter from my brother-in-law, Sir Clifford Williams, of Clifford Hall. He wants me to find him an honest young groom, about 20 or 21, who knows his business. He would have 18 shillings a week at first. Sir Clifford is a good master, and if you could get the place it would be a good start for you." "How old are you, James?" 19 next May, sir." "That's young. What do you think, John?" "Well, sir, it is young, but he is as steady as a man, and as strong. Though he has not had much experience in driving, he has a light firm hand and a quick eye, and he is very careful. So, James, think it over, talk to your mother at dinner time, and then let me know what you wish." In a few days after this conversation, it was decided that James should go to Clifford Hall in a month or 6 weeks. In the meantime, he was to get all the practice in driving that could be given to him. I never knew the carriage to go out so often before. When the mistress did not go out, the master drove himself in the two-wheeled carriage. But now, whether it was master or the young ladies, Ginger and I were put in the carriage, and James drove us. At first, John rode with him, telling him this and that, and after that James drove alone. It was wonderful what a number of places the master would go to in the city on Saturday, and what strange streets we were driven through. He was sure to go to the railway station just as the train was coming in, and carriages and carts were all trying to get over the bridge together. That bridge wanted good horses and good drivers when the railway bell was ringing, for it was narrow, and there was a very sharp turn up to the station. Here, people could easily run into each other if they were not careful enough. Chapter 14. The Old Stableman. After this my master and mistress decided to pay a visit to some friends who lived about 46 miles from our home, and James was to drive them. The first day we traveled 32 miles. We stopped once or twice on the road, and just as the sun was going down, we reached the town where we were to spend the night. We stopped at the hotel, which was in the marketplace. It was a very large one. We drove into a long yard. At the further end of the yard were the stables and coach houses. 2 stablemen came to take us out. The head stableman was a pleasant, active little man. With a pat and a good word he led me to a long stable, with 6 or 8 stalls in it, and 2 or 3 horses. The other man brought Ginger. James stood by while we were cleaned. I never was cleaned so gently and quickly as by that little old man. When he had done, James stepped up and felt me over, and he found my coat as clean and smooth as silk. "Well," he said, "I thought I was very quick, and our John quicker still, but you are quicker than anyone." "Practice makes perfect," said the little stableman. "I have done it for 40 years. You see, I have worked with horses ever since I was 12 years old, and I can tell you it is a great pleasure to work with an animal like this. I can tell how a horse is treated." "Who is your master, young man?" "I'm sure he is a good one, from what I see." "He is Squire Gordon, of Birtwick Park," said James. "Ah, I have heard of him. He is the best rider in the county." "I believe he is," said James, "but he rides very little now, since the poor young master was killed." "Ah, poor gentleman. I read all about it in the paper at the time. A fine horse killed too, wasn't there?" "Yes," said James, "he was a wonderful creature, brother to this one, and just like him." "Pity, pity," said the old man. "A man's life and a horse's life are worth more than a fox's tail." During this time the other man had finished Ginger and had brought our corn, and James and the old man left the stable together. Chapter 15. The Fire. Later on in the evening a traveller's horse was brought in by the second stableman. While he was cleaning him, a young man with a pipe in his mouth walked into the stable. "I say, Towler," said the stableman, "just go up and get down some hay for this horse, will you? Please put down your pipe." "All right," said the other, and went up through a little door, and I heard him step across the floor overhead and put down the hay. Then the door was locked. I can't say how long I had slept, or what time in the night it was when I woke up. I felt very uncomfortable, though I hardly knew why. I got up. The air seemed thick, and I heard Ginger coughing. It was quite dark, and I could see nothing, but the stable seemed full of smoke, and I hardly knew how to breathe. The little door above me had been left open, and I thought that was the place it came through. I listened, and heard a strange noise above. I did not know what it was, but the sound made me tremble all over. The other horses were all awake, some were pulling at their bridles, others stamping. At last I heard steps outside, and the younger stableman burst into the stable with a lantern. He began to untie the horses and try to lead them out, but he seemed in such a hurry and so frightened himself that he frightened me still more. The first horse would not go with him. He tried the second and third, and they too would not move. He came to me next and tried to drag me out of the stall by force. Of course that was no use. He tried us all by turns and then left the stable. No doubt we were very foolish, but danger seemed to be all round. The fresh air that had come in through the open door made it easier to breathe, but the sound overhead grew louder. As I looked upward I saw a red light shining on the wall. Then I heard a cry of fire outside, and the old stableman quietly and quickly came in. He got one horse out and went to another, but the flames were coming through the little door, and the noise overhead was terrible. The next thing I heard was James' voice. "Come, my beauties, it is time for us to be off, so wake up and come along." I stood nearest the door, so he came to me first. "Come, beauty, we'll soon be out of this fire." He took the scarf off his neck and tied it lightly over my eyes. Then he led me out of the stable. Safe in the yard, he slipped the scarf off my eyes and shouted, "Here's somebody. Take this horse while I go back for the other." A tall man stepped forward and took me, and James rushed back into the stable. The yard was in disorder. The windows were thrown up, and people were shouting all sorts of things. I kept my eye fixed on the stable door, where the smoke poured out thicker than ever. I could see flashes of red light. Shortly after, I heard a loud, clear voice, which I knew was my master's. "James Howard. James Howard. Are you there?" There was no answer, but I heard something falling in the stable. The next moment I saw James coming through the smoke, leading Ginger with him. She was coughing violently, and he was not able to speak. "My brave boy," said Master, "are you hurt?" James shook his head, for he could not yet speak. "And now," said Master, "when you have got your breath, James, we'll get out of this place as quickly as we can." Suddenly, from the marketplace there came a sound of running feet and loud noises of wheels. "It is the fire engine," shouted 2 or 3 voices. 2 horses dashed into the yard with a heavy engine behind them. The firemen jumped to the ground. The fire was now rising from the roof. We got out as fast as we could into the marketplace. The stars were shining, and except the noise behind us, all was still. My master led the way to a large hotel on the other side. As soon as the stableman came, he said, "James, I must now hurry to your mistress. Take care of the horses." And with that he was gone. The next morning the master came to see how we were, and to speak to James. I did not hear much, but I could see that James looked very happy, and I thought the master was proud of him. Our mistress had been so much frightened in the night that the journey was put off till the afternoon. In the morning, James went first to the inn, to see about our harness and the carriage, and then to hear more about the fire. When he came back we heard him tell the stableman about it. At first no one could guess how the fire had been caused, but at last a man said he saw Dick Towler go into the stable with a pipe in his mouth. Then the younger stableman said he had asked Dick to go up the ladder, to put down some hay, but told him to put down his pipe first. Dick said he did not take the pipe with him, but no one believed him. James said the roof and floor had all fallen in, and that only the black walls were standing. The 2 poor horses that could not be got out were buried under the burnt roof. Chapter 16. John Manley's Talk. The rest of our journey was very easy, and a little after sunset we reached the house of my master's friend. We were taken into a clean, comfortable stable. The kind coachman made us very comfortable, and he seemed to think highly of James when he heard about the fire. "There is one thing quite clear, young man," he said. "Your horses know who they can trust. It is one of the hardest things in the world to get horses out of a stable when there is either fire or flood." We stopped 2 or 3 days at this place, and then returned home. All went well on the journey. We were glad to be in our own stable again, and John was equally glad to see us. Before he and James left us for the night, James said, "I wonder who is coming in my place." "Little Joe Green at the lodge," said John. "He is only 14 and a half, but he is quick and kind-hearted. He wishes very much to come, and his father would like it. I know the master would like to give him the chance." I agreed to try him for 6 weeks. The next day Joe came to the stables to learn all he could before James left. He learned to sweep the stable, to bring in the straw and hay. He began to clean the harness and helped to wash the carriage. He was a nice little bright fellow and always came whistling to his work. At last the day came when James had to leave us. Although he was always cheerful, he looked quite sad that morning. "You see," he said to John, "I am leaving a great deal behind, my mother and you, and a good master and mistress, and then the horses, and my old Merrylegs. I shall not know anyone at the new place. Cheer up, James. You'll make friends there, and if you get on well, as I am sure you will, it will be a fine thing for your mother. And she will be proud enough that you have got into such a good place as that." So John cheered him up, but everyone was sorry to lose James. Merrylegs missed him for several days and did not want to eat. So John took him out several mornings, and he was soon all right. Joe's father, Thomas Green, would often come in and give a little help, as he understood the work. Joe tried hard to learn, and John was quite pleased with him. Chapter 17. going for the doctor. One night, a few days after James had left, I had eaten my hay and was lying down in my straw fast asleep. Suddenly I was woken up by the stable bell ringing very loud. I heard the door of John's house open and his feet running up to the hall. He was back again in no time. He unlocked the stable door and came in, calling out, "Wake up, Beauty. You must go quickly now." And before I could think, he had got the saddle on my back and the bridle on my head. He just ran round for his coat and then took me up to the hall door. The squire stood there, with a lamp in his hand. "Now, John," he said, "ride for your mistress's life. There is not a moment to lose. Give this note to Dr. White. Give your horse a rest at the inn, and be back as soon as you can." John said, "Yes, sir," and was on my back in a minute. Away we went through the park, through the village, and down the hill till we came to the riverside. There was a long piece of level road by the riverside. John said to me, "Now, Beauty, do your best," and so I did. I wanted no whip, and for 2 miles I ran as fast as I could. I don't believe that my old grandfather, who won the race at Newmarket, could have gone faster. The air was cool, the moon was bright, and it was very pleasant. After 8 miles run we came to the town, through the streets, and into the market-place. It was all quite still except the sound of my feet on the stones. Everybody was asleep. The church clock struck 3 as we drew up at Dr. White's door. John rang the bell twice, and then knocked at the door hard. A window was thrown up, and Dr. White put his head out and said, "What do you want?" "Mrs. Gordon is very ill, sir. Master wants you to go at once. He thinks she will die if you cannot get there. Here is a note." "Wait," he said. "I will come." He shut the window and was soon at the door. "But," he said, "my horse has been out all day and is quite tired. What is to be done? Can I have your horse?" "He has run nearly all the way, sir. And I was to give him a rest here, but I think my master would not be against it, sir." "All right," he said, "I will soon be ready." John stood by me and stroked my neck. I was very hot. The doctor came out soon, and in a minute we had left John far behind. The doctor was a heavier man than John, and not so good a rider. However, I did my very best. When we came to the hill the doctor drew me up. "Now, my good fellow," he said, "take some breath." I was glad he did, for I was tired out, but that breathing helped me on, and soon we were in the park. Joe was at the gate, and my master was at the hall door. He did not say a word. The doctor went into the house with him, and Joe led me to the stable. I was glad to get home. My legs shook under me. I had not a dry hair on my body. Joe rubbed my legs and my chest, but he did not put my warm cloth on me. He thought I was so hot I should not like it. Then he gave me a pail of water to drink. It was cold and very good, and I drank it all. Then he gave me some hay and some corn and went away. Soon I began to shake and tremble, and turned very cold. My legs and my chest ached, and I felt uncomfortable all over. How I wished for my warm thick cloth, as I stood and trembled. I wished for John, but he had 8 miles to walk, so I lay down in my straw and tried to go to sleep. After a long while I heard John at the door. He was at my side in a moment, bending down by me. I could not tell him how I felt, but he seemed to know it all. He covered me up with 2 or 3 warm cloths, and then ran to the house for some hot water. He made me some warm gruel, which I drank, and then I think I went to sleep. John seemed to be very angry. I heard him say to himself over and over again, "Stupid boy. Stupid boy. No cloth put on, and I dare say the water was cold, too. Boys are no good." But Joe was a good boy, after all. I was now very ill, and I could not draw my breath without pain. John looked after me night and day. He would get up 2 or 3 times in the night to come to me. My master, too, often came to see me. "My poor Beauty," he said one day, "you saved your mistress's life, Beauty. Yes, you saved her life." I was very glad to hear that. John told my master he never saw a horse go so fast in his life. It seemed as if the horse knew what was the matter. Of course I did. At least I knew that John and I must go at the top of our speed, because of the mistress. I do not know how long I was ill. Mr. Bond, the horse doctor, came every day. Ginger and Merrylegs had been moved into the other stable, so that I might be quiet. One night John had to give me some medicine, and Thomas Green came in to help him. After I had taken it, John and Thomas wanted to see how the medicine worked. So they went and sat down on a bench that had been brought into Merrylegs' stall. For a while both men were silent, and then Tom Green said in a low voice, "I wish, John, you'd say a kind word to Joe. The boy is quite sad. He can't eat his meals, and he can't smile. He says he knows it was all his fault, though he is sure he did the best he knew, and he says, if Beauty dies no one will ever speak to him again. It makes me sad to hear him. I think you might give him just a word, he is not a bad boy." After a short pause John said slowly, "You must not be too hard upon me, Tom. I know he meant no harm. I never said he did. I know he is not a bad boy. But you see, I am so proud of that horse, and he is such a favorite with the master and mistress. It makes me sad to think that his life may be thrown away like this. But I will try to give the boy a good word tomorrow, if Beauty is better." I heard no more of this conversation, for the medicine did well, and sent me to sleep. In the morning I felt much better. Joe Green went on very well. He learned quickly, and was so careful that John began to trust him in many things. But he was so young, and he was seldom allowed to exercise either Ginger or me. Chapter 18. The Parting. Now I had lived in this happy place 3 years, but sad changes were about to come over us. We heard from time to time that our mistress was ill. The doctor was often at the house, and the master looked serious and anxious. Then we heard that she must leave her home at once and go to a warm country for 2 or 3 years. Everybody was sorry to hear the news, but the master began at once to make arrangements for leaving England. We used to hear them talk about it in our stable. John went about his work silently and sadly, and Joe hardly whistled. There was a great deal of coming and going, and Ginger and I had full work. Miss Jessie went first with Flora and their governess. They came to say goodbye to us. Then we heard what had been arranged for us. Master had sold Ginger and me to his old friend, the Earl of W., for he thought we should have a good place there. He had given Merrylegs to the vicar, who wanted a pony for Mrs. Blomefield. Joe would go to take care of him, and to help in the house. John had the offer of several good places, but he said he should wait a little and look round. The evening before they left, the master came into the stable to give some directions, and to give his horses the last pat. He seemed very sad. "Have you decided what to do, John?" he said. "I find you have not accepted either of those offers." "No, sir, I have made up my mind that if I could get a job as a horse trainer, it would be the right thing for me. I always get on well with horses." "What do you think of it, sir?" "You understand horses," said master, "and they understand you. If I can help you, write to me." Master gave John the name and address, and then he thanked him for his long service. "You and my dear mistress have done so much for me that I could never repay it. But we shall never forget you, sir." They shook hands and both left the stable. The last sad day had come. Ginger and I brought the carriage up to the hall door for the last time. The servants brought out cushions and many other things, and when all were arranged master came down the steps carrying the mistress in his arms. He placed her carefully in the carriage, while the house servants stood round crying. "Goodbye, again," he said. "We shall not forget any of you," and he got in. "Drive on, John." Joe jumped up, and we went slowly through the park, and through the village, where the people were standing at their doors to have a last look. When we reached the railway station I think mistress walked from the carriage to the waiting room. I heard her say in her own sweet voice, "Goodbye, John. God bless you." John made no answer. Perhaps he could not speak. As soon as Joe had taken the things out of the carriage John called him to stand by the horses, while he went on the platform. Poor Joe stood close up to our heads to hide his tears. Very soon the train came into the station. 2 or 3 minutes later, the doors were closed, and the train moved away, leaving behind it only clouds of white smoke and some very heavy hearts. When it was quite out of sight, John came back. "We shall never see her again," he said. Chapter 19. Earlshall. After breakfast the next morning, Joe put Merrylegs into the mistress's low carriage to take him to the vicar. He came first and said goodbye to us. Then John put the saddle on Ginger and the leading rein on me and rode us across the country about 15 miles to Earlshall Park, where the Earl of W lived. We went into the yard through a stone gateway, and John asked for Mr. York. It was some time before he came. He was a fine-looking, middle-aged man. He was very friendly and polite to John, and he called a groom to take us to our boxes. We were taken to a stable and placed in boxes next to each other, where we were rubbed down and fed. In about half an hour John came round to pat and speak to us for the last time. His voice sounded very sad. I held my face close to him. That was all I could do to say goodbye, and then he was gone. I have never seen him since. The next day Lord W came to look at us. He seemed pleased with us. In the afternoon we were harnessed and put in a carriage, and at 3 o'clock we were led round to the front of the house. 2 servants were standing ready. Soon my lady came down the flight of stone steps. She stepped round to look at us. She was a tall, proud-looking woman, and did not seem pleased about something, but she said nothing, and got into the carriage. This was the first time that I had worn a check rein. I was certainly annoyed, because I was unable to get my head down now and then. But it did not pull my head higher than I was used to carry it. I felt anxious about Ginger, but she seemed to be quiet and happy. The next day at 3 o'clock we were again at the door, and the servants ready. The lady came down the steps and said, "York, you must put those horses' heads higher. They are not fit to be seen." York got down and said very politely, "I beg your pardon, my lady, but these horses have not been reined up for 3 years, but if you like, I can take them up a little more." "Do so," she said. York came round to our heads and shortened the rein. That day we had a steep hill to go up. Of course, I wanted to put my head forward and make the work easier, but I had to pull with my head up now. That made me very tired. When we came in, Ginger said, "Now you see what it is like, but this is not bad. If it does not get much worse than this, I shall say nothing about it. But if they pull me up tight, why, let them look out." Day by day, our check reins were shortened, and I began to feel afraid when my harness was put on. Ginger, too, seemed annoyed, though she said very little. Chapter 20. A strike for freedom. One day my lady came down later than usual. "Drive to the Duchess of B's," she said. "Are you never going to get those horses' heads up, York? Raise them at once." York came to me first, while the groom stood at Ginger's head. He drew my head back and fixed the rein very tight, then he went to Ginger. The moment York took the rein off in order to shorten it, Ginger stood suddenly up on her hind legs. York had his nose hit and his hat knocked off, and the groom was nearly knocked down to the ground. At once they both flew to her head, but she went on jumping and kicking. At last she kicked herself out of the carriage and fell down, after giving me a hard blow on my leg. York at once sat himself down on her head to prevent her struggling. The groom soon set me free from Ginger and the carriage, and led me to my box. Then he ran back to York. I was much excited by what had happened. I was so angry that I wanted to kick the first person that came near me. Before long, however, Ginger was led in by 2 grooms. York came with her and gave his orders, and then came to look at me. In a moment he let down my head. "I knew these check reins would cause trouble," he said to himself. Then he felt me all over, and soon found the place where I had been kicked. It was painful, and he washed it gently with hot water. Lord W was very angry when he learned what had happened. He blamed York for obeying his mistress and York said he would only receive orders from the Lord himself from then on. Ginger was never put into the carriage again. Later, one of the Lord W's younger sons said he should like to have her. He was sure she would make a good hunter. As for me, I still had to go in the carriage and had a fresh partner called Max. He had always been used to the tight rein. I asked him how it was he bore it. "Well," he said, "I bear it because I must, but it is shortening my life. And it will shorten yours too." "Do you think," I said, "that our masters know how bad it is for us?" "I don't know," he replied. "During the 4 long months, I suffered a great deal from that rain in my lady's carriage. The rain hurt my neck and made it difficult to breathe, and I felt tired and very uncomfortable. In my old home, I always knew that John and my master were my friends. But here, although in many ways I was well treated, I had no friend. York might have known how that rain troubled me, but he did nothing to help." Chapter 21. The Lady Anne. Early in the spring, Lord W and some of his family went up to London and took York with them. I and Ginger and some other horses were left at home, and the head groom was left in charge. The Lady Harriet, who remained at the Hall, was often ill and never went out in the carriage, and the Lady Anne preferred riding on horseback with her brother or cousins. She was beautiful and gentle. She chose me for her horse and named me Black Auster. I enjoyed these rides very much in the clear cold air, sometimes with Ginger, sometimes with Lizzie. This Lizzie was a great favorite with the gentlemen because of her fine action and lively spirit, but Ginger told me she was rather nervous. There was a gentleman named Blantyre staying at the Hall. He always rode Lizzie and praised her so much that one day Lady Anne decided to try her. "I advise you not to ride her," he said. "She is too nervous for a lady and is not very safe." "My dear cousin," said Lady Anne, laughing, "please don't worry. I have been riding horses ever since I was a baby, and I have followed the hunting dogs a great many times. I want to try this Lizzie that you gentlemen are all so fond of, so please help me up." Blantyre said nothing more, and he placed her carefully on the saddle, gave the reins gently into her hand, and then got on me. Just as we were moving off, a servant came out with a slip of paper and message from the Lady Harriet. Would they ask this question for her at the doctor's and bring the answer? The village was about a mile off, and the doctor's house was the last in it. We went along pleasantly enough till we came to his gate. Blantyre got off at the gate and was going to open it for Lady Anne, but she said, "I will wait for you here." He went off and we waited. There was a meadow on the opposite side of the road. Its gate was open. Just then some cart horses and several young horses ran out. There was a boy behind them, waving a big whip. The young horses were excited, and one of them ran across the road and knocked into Lizzie's hind legs. Lizzie kicked hard, almost throwing Lady Anne to the ground, and immediately ran away at full speed. I gave a loud cry for help, and soon Blantyre came running to the gate. He looked anxiously about. Then he just caught sight of Lizzie and Lady Anne, now far away on the road. At once, he jumped to the saddle, and we ran after them as fast as we could. After about 1.5 miles the road bent to the right. Then it divided into 2 roads. Long before we came to the bend, Lady Anne was out of sight. Which way had she turned? A woman was standing at her garden gate. Blantyre shouted, "Which way?" "To the right," cried the woman, pointing with her hand. Away we went up the right-hand road. We saw her for a moment, then she was gone again round another bend. Several times we saw her, and then lost her again. Then we came to some open land, and here, we caught sight of her again. My lady's hat was gone, and her long brown hair was flying behind her. Her head and body were thrown back, as if she were pulling with all her remaining strength. Lizzie slowed down, because the ground was rough, and we began to catch up. There was a wide ditch ahead, and I was sure this would stop them. But no, without stopping, Lizzie jumped and fell. I jumped across the ditch and landed safely. Poor Lady Anne was lying on the ground, with her face to the earth. Blantyre jumped down and called her name. There was no sound. Gently he turned her face upward. It was white, and the eyes were closed. "Annie, dear Annie, do speak." But there was no answer. Not far away, there were two men cutting grass. When they saw what had happened, they ran up to help. One of them seemed much troubled at the sight and asked what he could do. "Can you ride?" "Well, sir, I do not ride well, but I do my best for Lady Anne." "Then ride to the doctor's and ask him to come at once, then on to the Hull. Tell them all that you know and ask them to send me the carriage. I shall stay here." He then climbed into the saddle and started on his journey. There was a great deal of excitement when they heard the news. I was turned into my box, the saddle and bridle were taken off, and a cloth thrown over me. 2 days after the accident, Blantyre paid me a visit. He patted me and praised me very much. He said that he was sure I knew of Annie's danger as well as he did. I learned that my young mistress was now out of danger and would soon be able to ride again. This was good news to me, and I looked forward to a happy life. Chapter 22. Reuben Smith. Now I must say a little about Reuben Smith, who looked after us when York went to London. He was gentle and very clever with horses. He was also a good driver. I believe everybody liked him, certainly the horses did. But he had one great fault. He sometimes drank too much. One night, when Reuben had to drive some guests home from a party, he was so drunk that he could not hold the reins. A gentleman of the party had to drive the ladies home. Reuben was at once dismissed. It happened a good while ago, but shortly before Ginger and I came, Smith had been taken back again. York had spoken to the Earl. The Earl was very kind-hearted, and the man had promised that he would never taste another drop as long as he lived there. He had kept his promise so well that York thought he might be safely trusted. One day, Smith rode me to the White Lion Hotel and ordered the stableman to feed me well and have me ready for him at 4 o'clock. A nail in one of my front shoes was loose, but the stableman did not notice it till just about 4 o'clock. Smith did not come into the yard till 5. He said he should not leave till 6, as he had met with some old friends. The man then told him of the nail. "That will be all right till we get home," said Smith. It was nearly 9 o'clock before he called for me, and then it was with a loud, rough voice. He seemed in a very bad temper. Almost before he was out of the town he began to run, whipping me now and then, though I was going at full speed. The moon had not yet risen, and it was very dark. Before we were out of the town, my shoe came off. But he was too drunk to notice. Of course my foot suffered terribly. It was terribly cut by the sharp stones. I could not go on. The pain was too great. I fell on both my knees and Smith was thrown off. He must have fallen with great force, for I was going so fast. The moon had just risen, and by its light I could see Smith lying a few yards beyond me. He could not get up. I could do nothing for him or myself. I stood watching and listening. It was a calm, sweet April night. There were no sounds but a few low notes of a night bird. Chapter 23. How it ended. It must have been nearly midnight when I heard at a great distance the sound of a horse's feet. As the sound came nearer and nearer I was almost sure it was Ginger's step. They came slowly over the stones and stopped at the dark figure that lay upon the ground. One of the men jumped out and bent down over it. "It is Reuben," he said, "and he does not move." The other man followed and bent over him. "He's dead," he said. "Feel how cold his hands are." They raised him up, but there was no life, and his face was covered with blood. They laid him down again and came and looked at me. They soon saw my cut knees. Robert tried to lead me forward. I made a step, but almost fell again. "Oh, he's bad in his foot as well as his knees, poor fellow." Reuben must have got drunk, Ned. He would never ride a horse over these stones without a shoe, unless he was drunk. Ned got the body into the carriage and started off very slowly. Robert came and looked at my foot again. Then he took his handkerchief and tied it closely round, and so he led me home. I shall never forget that night walk. It was more than 3 miles. They did not blame me for Smith's death. The owner of the White Lion Hotel said that Reuben was drunk when he started from the hotel. Chapter 24. A Job Horse. As soon as my knees got better, I was turned into a small meadow for a month or 2. No other creature was there, and though I enjoyed the freedom and the sweet grass, yet I felt very lonely. Ginger and I had become close friends, and now I missed her very much. One morning the gate was opened, and dear old Ginger was brought in. We were both glad to meet, but I soon learned that she had been ruined by hard riding, and after 12 months' rest she was going to be sold. We did not run about as we once did, but we used to feed and lie down together, and stand together for hours under one of the shady trees. One day, Robert came and led me away. Ginger was very sad to see me leave. She ran anxiously along by the fence, calling to me, as long as she could hear the sound of my feet. I was sold to a man who kept many horses and different kinds of carriages for hire. I was well fed and well cleaned there. On the whole, I think our master took as much care of us as he could. I was a job horse and was hired by all sorts of people. Some were good drivers, but many were very bad. At last, there was a gentleman who knew how to drive a good horse. This made me quite happy. It seemed like old times again. This gentleman liked me so much that he persuaded my master to sell me to a friend of his who wanted a safe, pleasant horse for riding. And in the summer I was sold to Mr. Barry. Chapter 25. A Thief. My new master was an unmarried man. He lived at Bath. He hired a stable a short distance from his house, and a man named Filcher to look after me. My master knew very little about horses, but he treated me well. He ordered the best hay with plenty of oats and other good food for me. For a few days all went on well. After a while it seemed to me that there were fewer oats in my meal. That was not enough to keep me strong and healthy. I could not complain, so it went on for about 2 months. I wondered that my master did not see that something was wrong. However, one afternoon he rode out into the country to see a friend of his, a gentleman farmer. This gentleman knew horses well. He looked at me and said, "It seems to me, Barry, that your horse does not look so well as he did when you first had him. Has he been well?" "Yes, I believe so," said my master, "but he is not so lively as he was. My groom tells me that horses are always weak in the autumn." "Why, this is only August," said the farmer, "and with your light work and good food he ought not to look like this, even if it was autumn. How do you feed him?" My master told him. The farmer shook his head slowly and began to feel me over. "I advise you to look into your stable a little more," said the farmer. How I wished I could tell my master where his oats went to. My groom used to come every morning about 6 o'clock, bring a little boy with him. The boy always had a covered basket with him. He used to go with his father into the room where the oats were kept. He would fill a little bag with oats, and then be off with it. 5 or 6 mornings after this, just as the boy had left the stable, the door was pushed open. A policeman walked in, holding the child tight by the arm. Another policeman followed and locked the door on the inside, saying, "Show me the place where your father keeps his rabbit's food." The boy looked very frightened and began to cry, but there was no escape. Later, the policeman found another empty bag like the one in the boy's basket. Filcher was cleaning my feet at the time, but they soon saw him. The policeman took Filcher and his boy away. After this, Mr. Barry decided to give up keeping a horse and to hire when he wanted one. I was therefore sold again. Chapter 26. A London Cab Horse. My new master's name was Jerry Barker. His wife, Polly, was a fat little woman with smooth dark hair, dark eyes, and a merry little mouth. Their son was 12 years old, a tall good-tempered boy. Their daughter was 8 years old. They called her Dolly, and she looked very much like her mother. They were all fond of each other. I never knew such a happy merry family before or since. Jerry had a cab of his own and 2 horses, which he drove and looked after himself. His other horse was a tall white animal called Captain. The next morning, Polly and Dolly came into the yard to see me and make friends. Harry had been helping his father since the early morning. He said that I would be a wonderful horse. Polly brought me a slice of apple, and Dolly a piece of bread. It was wonderful to be loved again and talked to in a gentle voice, and I let them see that I wished to be friendly. Polly thought I was very handsome. She said I was too good for a cab, if it was not for the broken knees. "We'll call him Jack, after the old one, shall we, Polly?" asked Jerry. "Yes," she said, "for I like the good name." Captain went out in the cab all the morning. Harry came in after school to feed me and give me water. In the afternoon I was put into the cab. Jerry made sure that the collar and bridle were comfortable. After driving through the side street we came to the large cab stand. A number of cabs were drawn up, waiting for passengers. Some of the men were standing together talking. Some were sitting on their boxes reading the newspaper, and 1 or 2 were feeding their horses and giving them a drink of water. We pulled up at the back of the last cab. 2 or 3 men came round and began to look at me and talk about me. "Very good for a funeral," said one. "Too good-looking," said another, shaking his head. "You'll find out something wrong one of these fine mornings." Then a man in a great grey coat came up. The other men made way for him. This man's name was Grant, but he was called Grey Grant. He looked me all over. Then he said, "He's the right horse for you, Jerry. I don't care what you paid for him, he'll be worth it." The first week of my life as a cab horse was very hard. I had never been used to London. The noise, the crowds of horses, carts, and carriages that I had to go through made me feel anxious. But I soon found that I could perfectly trust my driver, and then I made myself easy and got used to it. Jerry was a good driver. He cared as much for horses as he did for himself. He soon found out that I was willing to work and do my best. He never used his whip on me. In a short time, I and my master understood each other as well as horse and man can do. In the stable too, he did all that he could to make us comfortable. Jerry kept us very clean and gave us as much change of food as he could, and always plenty of it. He always gave us plenty of clean fresh water. On Sundays, we rested. Chapter 27. Jerry Barker. I never knew a better man than my new master. He was good-tempered and merry, and he never quarreled with anybody. He was very fond of making little songs and singing them to himself. Harry was clever at stable work and always wanted to do what he could. Then Polly and Dolly used to come in the morning to help clean the cab. There used to be a great deal of laughing and fun between them. This made Captain and me very happy. They were always early in the morning. Jerry hated to see people waste their time. It always made him angry when people wanted him to drive hard because they were late. One day 2 wild-looking young men came out of a pub close by the stand and called Jerry. "We are rather late. Please hurry up and take us to the Victoria in time for the 1 o'clock train. You shall have a shilling extra. I will take you at the regular speed, gentlemen. Shillings don't pay for hurrying like that." Larry's cab was standing next to ours. He threw open the door and said, "Take my cab, gentlemen. My horse will get you there all right." Then he set off as hard as he could. Jerry patted me on the neck. "No, Jack. A shilling would not pay for that sort of thing, would it?" Although Jerry was against hard driving, he was not against going faster, as he said, if only he knew why. One morning, as we were waiting on the stand, a young man, carrying a heavy bag, stepped on a piece of orange peel on the road and fell down with great force. Jerry was the first to run and lift him up. He seemed much astonished, and as they led him into a shop, he walked as if he were in great pain. Jerry of course came back to the stand, but in about 10 minutes the shopkeeper called him, so we went across the road. "Can you take me to the Southeastern Railway?" said the young man. "I'm afraid I'll be late because of this unlucky fall." but it is very important for me to catch the 12 o'clock train. I should be most thankful if you could get me there in time, and will gladly pay you extra money." "I'll do my very best," said Jerry kindly, "if you think you are well enough, sir," for he looked white and ill. "I must go," he said. "Please open the door and let us lose no time." The next minute Jerry was on the box. "Now then, Jack, my boy," said he, "we'll show them how fast we can go, if we only know why." It was always difficult to drive fast in the city in the middle of the day, when the streets were full of traffic, but Jerry and I were used to it. I was quick and could always trust my driver. Jerry was quick and patient at the same time, and could trust his horse. That was a great thing too. He very seldom used the whip. I knew by his voice when he wanted to get on fast, and by the rein where I was to go. In and out we went, as fast as I could. At last, we reached the station just as the great clock pointed to 8 minutes to 12 o'clock. "Thank God. We are in time," said the young man, "and thank you too, my friend, and your good horse. Take this extra money." "No, sir. Thank you all the same." Without waiting for another word, Jerry drove me round to make room for other cabs that were coming up at the last minute. "Poor young fellow," he said, "I wonder what it was that made him so anxious." Jerry often talked to himself quite loud enough for me to hear when we were not moving. When Jerry returned to the cab stand, they wanted to know how much he had received for hurrying like that. "A good deal more than I generally get," said Jerry. "The gentleman offered me extra money, but I didn't take it. It was enough for me to see how glad he was to catch that train." "Well," said Larry, "you'll never be a rich man." "Perhaps not," said Jerry, "but I'll be a happy one." Chapter 28. Dolly and a Real Gentleman. Winter came early, with strong winds and snow almost every day for weeks. There was a coffee shop near the cab stand and Jerry went there now and then. Polly always supplied him with something to eat when he could not get home. Sometimes he would see little Dolly looking from the corner of the street to make sure if father was on the stand. If she saw him, she would bring him some hot soup or pudding. One cold windy day, Dolly had brought Jerry some hot soup and was standing by him while he ate it. He had hardly begun when a gentleman walked toward us very fast. Jerry gave the soup to Dolly and was going to take off my cloth when the gentleman cried out, "No, no, finish your soup, my friend. I have not much time to spare, but I can wait until you've finished." With these words, he seated himself in the cab. Jerry thanked him kindly and came back to Dolly. "There, Dolly, that's a gentleman. He has got time and thought for the comfort of a poor cab driver." Jerry finished his soup and then drove the man to Clapham. Several times after that, the same gentleman took our cab. I think he was very fond of dogs and horses. Whenever we took him to his own door, 2 or 3 dogs would come running to meet him. Sometimes he came round and patted me, saying in his quiet, pleasant way, "This horse has got a good master." One day he and another gentleman took our cab. They stopped at a shop, and while his friend went in, he stood at the door. On the other side of the street, there was a cart with 2 very fine horses. The driver was not with them. I can't tell how long they had been standing, but they seemed to think they had waited long enough and began to move off. Before they had gone many paces, the driver came running out and caught them. He seemed angry and whipped them hard. Our gentleman saw it all. He stepped quickly across the street and said in a decided voice, "If you don't stop that at once, I'll call the police." The man had clearly been drinking. He shouted angry words at the gentleman, but he stopped beating the horses. Then he took the reins and got into his cart. Meanwhile, our friend had quietly taken a notebook from his pocket. He looked at the name and address on the cart. Then he wrote something down. "Why do you do that?" shouted the driver, as he was moving on. Our friend smiled without answering him. When he returned to the cab, the other gentleman came back. "Why do you trouble yourself about other people's horses and servants?" he asked. Our friend stood still for a moment. Then he threw his head a little back and said, "Do you know why this world is as bad as it is?" "No," said the other. "Then I'll tell you. It is because people think only about their own business. When I see a bad thing like this, I always do what I can." "I wish there were more gentlemen like you, sir," said Jerry. "They are badly needed in this city." Chapter 29. Poor Ginger. One day, while our cab and many others were waiting outside one of the parks, a dirty old cab drove up beside ours. The horse was old, and its bones showed clearly through its brown coat. There was a hopeless look in her eyes, and I could not help noticing them. Then, as I was thinking where I had seen that horse before, she looked at me and said, "Black Beauty, is that you?" It was Ginger. But how she had changed! Her face was once so full of life, but now it was full of suffering, and she coughed frequently. Our drivers were standing together a little way off, so I stepped over to her, so that we might have a little quiet talk. It was a sad story that she told me. After 12 months' rest at Earlshall, she was considered to be ready for work again. So she was sold to a gentleman. For a little while she got on very well. But after a long journey, she became ill again. When she got better, she was again sold. In this way she was sold from one owner to another, each poorer than the one before. "And so at last," said she, "I was bought by a man who keeps a number of cabs and horses, and lets them out. I could not tell you what my life has been. They whip me, and make me work 7 days a week, with never a Sunday rest. I wish I was dead. I have seen dead horses, and I am sure they do not suffer pain. I wish I may drop down dead at my work." I was very sad, and I put my nose up to hers, but I could say nothing to comfort her. I think she was pleased to see me, for she said, "You are the only friend I ever had." Just then her driver came up and drove her off, leaving me very sad indeed. A short time after this, a cart with a dead horse in it passed our cab stand. It was a brown horse with a long thin neck. I believe it was Ginger. I hoped it was, for then her troubles would be over. Chapter 30. A Friend in Need. One day, there was a lot of work for Jerry and me. First came a fat gentleman with a heavy bag. He wanted to go to the Bishopsgate station. Then we were called by a party who wished to be taken to the Regent's Park. And next we were wanted in a side street, where an anxious old lady was waiting to be taken to the bank. There we had to stop to take her back again. Just as we had set her down, a red-faced gentleman, with a handful of papers, came running up. He was out of breath, and before Jerry could get down he had opened the door, jumped in, and called out, "Bow Street Police Station, quick!" So off we went with him. And when after another journey or two we came back, there was no other cab on the stand. Jerry said, "We must eat when we can on such days as these, Jack." He gave me my oats, and then he took out one of Polly's meat pies. Jerry and I had not eaten many mouthfuls before a poor young woman, carrying a heavy child, came along the street. She was looking this way and that way, and seemed quite worried. Then she made her way up to Jerry. She asked if he could tell her the way to St. Thomas's Hospital, and how far it was to get there. She said she had come from the country that morning, and was quite a stranger in London. The child was crying as she spoke. "Poor little fellow," she said, "he suffers a deal of pain. He is 4 years old, and can't walk any more than a baby. The doctor said, if I could get him into the hospital he might get well. Please, sir, how far is it, and which way is it?" "Why," said Jerry, "you can't walk through crowds like this. It is 3 miles away, and that child is heavy." "Yes, he is, but I am strong, thank God. If I knew the way I think I should get on. Please tell me the way." "You can't do it," said Jerry. "Now look here, just get into this cab, and I'll drive you safe to the hospital. Don't you see the rain is coming on?" "No, sir, no, I can't do that, thank you. I have only just money enough to get back with. Please tell me the way." "Listen," said Jerry, "I've got a wife and dear children at home. I know a father's feelings. Now get into that cab, and I'll take you there for nothing. I'd be ashamed of myself to let a woman and a sick child run a risk like that." "Oh, that's very kind of you," said the woman, and burst into tears. There, cheer up, my dear. I'll soon take you there. Come. Let me put you inside." As Jerry went to open the door, two men ran up, calling out, "Cab." "It's taken," cried Jerry. But one of the men pushed past the woman and jumped into the cab. The other followed. Jerry said firmly, "This cab is already taken, gentlemen, by that lady." "Lady," said one of them. "Oh. She can wait. Our business is very important. Besides, we were in first, and we shall stay in." A strange smile came over Jerry's face as he shut the door. "All right, gentlemen. Please stay in, as long as it suits you. I can wait, while you rest yourselves." He turned his back upon them and walked up to the young woman, who was standing near me. "They'll soon be gone," he said, laughing. "Don't worry, my dear." And he was right. When the two men realized that they were going to have a very long wait, they got out. And as they left, they called Jerry all kinds of bad names. After this, we were soon on our way to the hospital. When we got there, Jerry helped the young woman out. "Thank you 1,000 times," she said. "I could never have got here alone." "You're welcome, and I hope the dear child will soon be better." He watched her go in at the door. Then he patted my neck. He always did that when he was pleased. The rain was now coming down fast. And just as we were leaving the hospital, someone called out, "Cab." We stopped, and a lady came down the steps. Jerry seemed to know her at once. "Barker. Jerry Barker, is it you? I am very glad to find you here. You are just the friend I want, for it is very difficult to get a cab in this part of London today. I shall be proud to serve you, ma'am. I am glad I happened to be here. Where may I take you to, ma'am?" "To the Paddington station." We got to the station in good time. There, the lady stood a good while talking to Jerry. I found she had been Polly's mistress. "How do you like the cab work in winter?" she asked. "I know Polly was rather anxious about you last year." "Yes, she was. I had a bad cough that followed me up quite into the warm weather, and when I am out late she is very worried about me. But I am getting on pretty well, you see, and I would feel quite lost if I had not horses to look after." "Well, Barker," she said, "there are many places where good drivers or good grooms are wanted. If ever you think you ought to give up this cab work, let me know." Then she put something into his hand, saying, "There is some money for the 2 children. Polly will know how to spend it." Jerry thanked her and seemed much pleased. When we reached home at last, I, at least, was tired. Chapter 31. Jerry's New Year. For some people, Christmas and the New Year are very merry times, but for cabmen and their horses it is no holiday. There are so many parties and dances that the work is hard and often late. Sometimes driver and horse have to wait for hours in the cold rain or frost, while the merry people within are dancing. I wonder if the beautiful ladies ever think of the tired cabman and his horse waiting. We had a great deal of late work in the Christmas week, and Jerry's cough was bad. But no matter how late we were, Polly sat up for him and came out to meet him. She always looked anxious and troubled. On the evening of the New Year we had to take 2 gentlemen to a house in one of the West End squares. We set them down at 9 o'clock and were told to come again at 11. "You may have to wait a few minutes," said one, "but don't be late." As the clock struck 11 we were at the door, for Jerry was always on time. We waited until 12 o'clock, but the door did not open. The wind was very cold, and it was snowing. Jerry got off his box and pulled one of my cloths a little more over my neck. Then he walked up and down, trying to keep warm. At 12:30 he rang the bell and asked the servant if he would be wanted that night. "Oh, yes, you'll be wanted," said the man. "You must not go. It will soon be over." At 1:15 the door opened, and the 2 gentlemen came out. They got into the cab without a word and told Jerry where to drive. That was nearly 2 miles. When the men got out, they never said they were sorry to have kept us waiting so long. And they were angry when Jerry made them pay for the 2 hours and a quarter waiting. At last we got home. He could hardly speak, and his cough was terrible. Polly asked no questions, but opened the door for him. "Can't I do something?" she said. "Yes, get Jack something warm, and then boil me some gruel." It was late the next morning before anyone came, and then it was only Harry. He cleaned us and fed us, and swept out the stalls. Then he put the straw back again, as if it was Sunday. He was very still, and neither whistled nor sang. At noon he came again, and gave us our food and water. This time Dolly came with him. She was crying, and I learned that Jerry was dangerously ill. So 2 days passed, and there was great trouble indoors. We only saw Harry, and sometimes Dolly. On the 3rd day, while Harry was in the stable, Mr. Grant came in. "I wouldn't go to the house, my boy," he said, "but I want to know how your father is." "He is very bad," said Harry. "I'm sorry to hear that," said Grant, shaking his head, "but while there's life there's hope, so you must keep up your spirits." "Yes," said Harry quickly, "and the doctor said that father had a better chance than most men, because he didn't drink. I believe he thinks he will get over it, don't you think he will, Mr. Grant?" Mr. Grant looked puzzled. "I'm sure he will, my boy. He's the best man I know. I'll look in early tomorrow." Early next morning he was there. "Well," said he. "Father is better," said Harry. "Mother hopes he will get over it." "Thank God," said Mr. Grant, "and now you must keep him warm, and keep his mind easy." Mr. Grant was a kind man. He did a lot to help the family during that time. Jerry grew better slowly, but the doctor said that he must never go back to the cab work again. The children talked a lot about what father and mother would do, and how they could help to earn money. One afternoon, Dolly came into the stable to find Harry. "Who lives at Fairstowe, Harry?" "Mother has got a letter from Fairstowe." She seemed so glad, and ran upstairs to father with it. "Don't you know?" "Why, it is where Mrs. Fowler lives. She was mother's old mistress, you know. Father met her last summer, and she sent you and me some money each." "Oh, Mrs. Fowler. Of course, I know all about her. I wonder what she is writing to mother about." "Mother wrote to her last week," said Harry. "You know she told father if ever he gave up the cab work she would like to know. I wonder what she says. Run in and see, Dolly." In a few minutes, Dolly came dancing into the stable. "Oh, Harry, there never was anything so beautiful. Mrs. Fowler says we are all to go and live near her. There is a cottage now empty that will just suit us, with a garden and a hen house, and apple trees, and everything. Her coachman is going away in the spring, and then she will want father in his place. There are good families round, where you can get a place in the garden or the stable. And there's a good school for me. Mother and father look so happy." "That's wonderful," said Harry. "It will suit father and mother both." It was quickly decided that, as soon as Jerry was well enough, they should move to the country. Then the cab and horses should be sold as soon as possible. This was sad news for me, for I was not young now, and could not expect a better master than Jerry. Jerry said I should not go to cab work again, and Mr. Grant promised to find a place for me, where I should be comfortable. The day came for going away. Jerry had not been allowed to go out yet, and I never saw him after that New Year's Eve. Polly and the children came to say goodbye. "Poor old Jack. Dear old Jack. I wish we could take you with us," Polly said. Then she put her hand on my back, put her face close to my neck and kissed me. Dolly was crying, and kissed me too. Harry stroked me a great deal, but said nothing. He seemed very sad, and so I was led away to my new place. Chapter 32. Jakes and the Lady. I was sold to a baker, whom Jerry knew. Jerry thought I should have good food and fair work with him. But the baker's cart driver Jakes always had the check rein up. This made it difficult for me to pull a heavy cart. By the time I had been there 3 or 4 months, I became very weak. One day, I was pulling a cart up a hill. It was heavier than usual. I used all my strength, but I could not get on. I had to stop several times to rest. This did not please my driver, and he whipped me badly. "Get on, you lazy fellow," he said, "or I'll make you." Again I started the heavy load and struggled on a few yards. Again the whip came down, and again I struggled forward. The pain was sharp, but my mind was hurt as much as my poor sides. I was doing my very best, but the driver was still punishing me so cruelly. It made me very sad. Jakes was whipping me a third time when a lady stepped quickly up to him and said in a sweet voice, "Oh, please do not whip your good horse any more. I am sure he is doing all he can. The road is very steep. I am sure he is doing his best." "Then he must do something more than his best," said Jakes. "But is it not a heavy load?" she said. Yes, too heavy," he said. He was raising the whip again when the lady said, "Please stop. I think I can help you, if you will let me." The man laughed. "You see," she said, "he cannot use all his strength with his head held back with that check rein. If you take it off, I am sure he would do better." The rein was taken off. Then I moved my head up and down several times to make my neck feel better. "Poor fellow. That is what you wanted," said she, patting me with her gentle hand. Then she turned to Jakes. "Now if you will speak kindly to him and lead him on, I believe he will be able to do better." Jakes took the rein. "Come on, Blackie." I put down my head and pulled hard. I spared no strength, and I pulled the cart up the hill. Then I stopped to take a breath. The lady had walked along and now came up to me. She patted my neck. "You see, he was quite willing when you gave him the chance. I am sure he is a fine horse. You won't put that rein on again, will you?" "Well, ma'am, I'll remember it another time, and thank you. But if he went without a check rein I should be laughed at by all the cart drivers. It is the fashion, you see." "It is better," she said, "to lead a good fashion than to follow a bad one. A great many gentlemen do not use check reins now. Our carriage horses have not worn them for 15 years. With another soft pat on my neck, she walked away. After that, Jakes always took off my check rein when I was going up a hill. That made my life easier. But pulling heavy carts day after day took my strength out of me, so a younger horse was bought in my place. Chapter 33. Hard Times. I was sold to a large cab owner. His name was Nicholas Skinner. He was hard on his drivers and they were hard on the horses. In this place we had no Sunday rest, and it was hot summer. Sometimes on a Sunday morning a party of men would hire the cab for the day. I had to take them 10 or 15 miles out into the country and back again. None of them would get down to walk up a hill. Sometimes I was so hot and tired that I could hardly touch my food. My driver was just as hard as his master. He had a cruel whip with something so sharp at the end that it sometimes drew blood. My life was now so terrible that I wished I might, like Ginger, drop down dead at my work. One day I nearly got my wish. I was at the railway station when we were called for. It was a family of 4, a noisy man with a lady, a little boy and a young girl, and a great deal of luggage. The lady and the boy got into the cab. While the man ordered about the luggage, the young girl came and looked at me. "Father," she said, "I am sure this poor horse cannot take us and all our luggage so far. He is so very weak and tired. Do look at him." "Oh, he's all right, miss," said my driver, "he's strong enough. He could take more than that." "Father, do take a second cab," said the young girl. "I am sure it is very cruel. Get in at once, Grace. The man knows his own business, of course. There, get in and hold your tongue." My gentle friend had to obey, and box after box was dragged up and put on the top of the cab or by the side of the driver. At last all was ready, and he drove out of the station. The load was very heavy, and I had had neither food nor rest since morning, but I did my best, as I always had done. I got along fairly well till we came to Ludgate Hill. The load was heavy, and I was tired by then. I was struggling to keep on. Suddenly, my feet slipped from under me, and I fell heavily to the ground on my side. I lay quite still. Indeed, I had no strength to move, and I thought now I was going to die. I heard loud angry voices around me, but it was all like a dream. I thought I heard that sweet voice saying, "Oh, that poor horse. It is all our fault." Someone said, "He's dead. He'll never get up again." Then I could hear a policeman giving orders, but I did not even open my eyes. I could only draw a breath now and then. Some cold water was thrown over my head, and something was covered over me. I can't tell how long I lay there, but I found my life coming back. A kind-voiced man was patting me and encouraging me to get up. After 1 or 2 attempts, I stood up and was gently led to some stables close by. In the evening I was well enough to be led back to Skinner's stables. I think they did their best for me. In the morning Skinner came with a doctor to look at me. He examined me very closely and said, "He has been worked too hard. If you could let him rest for 6 months, he would be able to work again, but now there is no strength left in him." "Then he must just go to the dogs," said Skinner. "I have no meadows for sick horses. He might get well, or he might not. That sort of thing doesn't suit my business. My plan is to work them as long as they'll go, and then sell them." "There is a sale of horses in about 10 days, said the doctor. "If you rest him and feed him up, he may get better. Then you may get more than his skin is worth." Skinner took the doctor's advice. He gave orders that I should be well fed and cared for. 10 days of perfect rest and plenty of good food made me better. 12 days later, I was taken to the sale, a few miles out of London. Chapter 34. The Farmer and His Grandson. At the sale, of course I found myself among other old horses. The buyers and sellers too were old and poor. I noticed a farmer who looked like a gentleman, with a young boy by his side. When he came up to me he stood still. He put out his hand and gave me a kind pat on the neck. I put out my nose in answer to his kindness. The boy stroked my face. "Poor old fellow. See, grandfather, how well he understands kindness. Could not you buy him and make him young again?" "My dear Willie, I can't make all old horses young." "Well, grandfather, I don't believe that this one is old. I wish you would look into his mouth, and then you could tell. Though he is so very thin, his eyes are not sunk like some old horses." The old gentleman laughed. "Oh, you seem to know as much about horses as your old grandfather. But do look at his mouth, grandfather, and ask the price. I am sure he would grow young in our meadows." The man who had brought me for sale said, "The young gentleman can recognize a good horse. In fact, this horse is not an old one. He has been worked too hard. If you rest him for 6 months, he would be all right." "What is the lowest you will take for him?" said the farmer. £5, sir." That was the lowest price. The old gentleman slowly took out his purse and counted £5. Then I was taken to the inn. Both the boy and the old gentleman seemed pleased. I had a good meal at the inn, and was then gently ridden home by a servant of my new master's. There, I was put into a large meadow with a shed in one corner of it. The farmer gave orders that I should have hay and oats every night and morning, and I was let out into the meadow during the day. "You, Willie," said he, "must take good care of him." The boy was proud of his job. Every day he paid me a visit. Sometimes, he gave me a bit of carrot, or something good. Sometimes he stood by me, while I ate my oats. He always came with kind words, and of course I grew very fond of him. I used to come to him in the field, and follow him about. Sometimes he brought his grandfather, who always looked closely at my legs. During the winter my legs improved so much that I began to feel quite young again. The spring came round. One day in March the old gentleman decided to try me in the carriage. I was well pleased, and he and Willie drove me a few miles. My legs were all right now, and I did the work very easily. "He's becoming young, Willie. We must give him a little gentle work now." "Oh, grandfather, how glad I am you bought him. So am I, my boy, but he has to thank you more than me. We must now be looking out for a good place for him. Chapter 35. My last home. One day during this summer the groom cleaned and dressed me with special care. Willie seemed half anxious, half excited, as he got into the carriage with his grandfather. "I hope the ladies like him," said the old gentleman. A mile or two away from the village, we came to a pretty low house. Willie rang the bell and asked if Miss Blomefield or Miss Ellen was at home. Yes, they were. So, Willie stayed with me, and his grandfather went into the house. In about 10 minutes he returned, followed by 3 ladies. One of them was a tall, pale lady. She leaned on a younger lady, with dark eyes and a merry face. The other, a very serious-looking person, was Miss Blomefield. They all came and looked at me and asked questions. The younger lady was Miss Ellen. She said she was sure she should like me. I had such a good face. The tall, pale lady said that she was afraid I might fall down again. "You see, ladies," said the farmer, "many good horses have had their knees broken because their drivers are careless. I should say that he probably fell because of his driver's carelessness. If you like, you can try him for a few weeks. Then your driver will see what he thinks of him." "You have always given us good advice about our horses," said the Miss Blomefield. "So if my sister Lavinia agrees, we will accept your offer to try him." It was then arranged that I should be sent for the next day. The next morning, a young man came for me. At first he looked pleased, but when he saw my knees he became disappointed. "I didn't think, sir," said he, "you would have suggested to my ladies a horse like that." "You are only taking him to try him," said my master. "If he is not as safe as any horse you ever drove, send him back." I was led to my new home and placed in a comfortable stable. The groom fed me and left me alone. The next day, when the groom was cleaning my face, he said, "That is just like the star that Black Beauty had. He is much the same height too. I wonder where he is now." Then he began to look me over carefully, talking to himself. "White star in the forehead, one white foot, and a little white place on his back. It must be Black Beauty. Why, Beauty, Beauty, do you know me? I'm little Joe Green, who almost killed you." And he began patting me as if he was quite pleased. I could not say that I remembered him, for now he was a fine-grown young fellow. But I was sure he knew me, and that he was Joe Green. I was very glad. I put my nose up to him and tried to say that we were friends. I never saw a man so pleased. In the afternoon I was put into a carriage and brought to the door. Miss Ellen was going to try me, and Green went with her. I soon found that she was a good driver, and she seemed pleased with me. I heard Joe telling her about me. He said he was sure I was Squire Gordon's old Black Beauty. When we returned, the other sisters came out to hear about me. She told them what she had just heard and said, "I shall certainly write to Mrs. Gordon and tell her that her favorite horse has come to us. How pleased she will be." After this I was driven every day for a week or so, and Miss Lavinia at last felt safe with me. After this, they decided to keep me and call me by my old name of Black Beauty. I have now lived in this happy place a whole year. Joe is the best and kindest of grooms. My work is easy and pleasant, and I feel my strength and spirits all coming back again. The farmer said to Joe the other day, "In your place, he will last till he is 20 years old, perhaps more." Willie always speaks to me when he can and treats me as his special friend. My ladies have promised that I shall never be sold, so I have nothing to fear. Here my story ends. My troubles are all over, and I am at home. And often before I am quite awake, I dream I am still in the orchard at Birtwick, standing with my old friends under the apple trees.